Well, that's why you're here.
Talk about bad decisions.
Always bad decisions. What's up, my friends? I was going to say happy Saturday, but that's just inaccurate. Happy Friday here from Awesemo.com. This is the College Football Strategy Show, breaking down everything that you need before these games kick off in about an hour. I am Ben Reza. I am joined as I am each and every day when we talk college football by Matt Gajeski. Happy late Thanksgiving to you, sir. I hope it was a good one yesterday. You excited to talk a little college football on a Friday here?
Yeah, man. Rivalry week is here.
Yes.
Very excited for it. Two main slates this week. So it's been a ton of work. I am coming to you live from northern Wisconsin where my folks live, but still very excited for today's games.
Yeah, we got a good batch. You mentioned rivalry week, some interesting spreads. A lot of, I think, Friday more than Saturday, and we'll be back tomorrow. There's more lopsided games here, but that gives us an opportunity to maybe find a crazy upset, talk about some teams that we normally don't get on the slate. So I am excited about that. Here we go. So we've got 12. We're not going to be pushed for time as much here. It's good to see everyone in chat. Obviously, we hope you had a good day yesterday. You're excited to talk a little football. Before we dive into the slate, though, we want to talk about PrizePicks, who has stayed with us throughout the year. They've been an awesome sponsor, and I know that their gameplay over there is very, very exciting to a lot of people. If you've not been over there and you have not played their daily prop-based contests, they want to get you started with a really good deposit bonus. And just really quickly, what you're going to be doing over there, you're picking 2, 3, 4, 5 players on the board, and you're just going to project, are they going higher or lower the line that they are setting? If you correctly pick, say, 5 of 5, you're going to get up to 10x your entry free. And of course, they don't have just college football. They've got the NBA, they've got the NFL. All the other sports that you guys love to play is available at PrizePicks. Download the app in the App Store or on Google Play. Use that deposit using the promo code Awesemo. Instant deposit match of up to $100. Matt, we talk about this a lot. You know, they have some props that you don't see other places. One today that I was a little interested in is Sam Howell and his rushing yards. He was held in check last week a little bit, but I think he's going to be pretty busy on the ground, as we've seen him a good amount this year.
Yeah, he's just been incredibly mobile. They've needed him. Ty Chandler hasn't exactly been the same productive back that they had last year with Javonte Williams and Michael Carter. And their offense has changed a lot. Their offensive line has struggled quite a bit. And a lot of it's not just like on design runs. They have done quite a bit of that. But without the elite receivers, you know, without what we had in Diami Brown downfield, these players can't separate as much, and the opposing defenses have been able to kind of dedicate coverage towards Josh Downs. So when these players aren't open, Sam Howell's taking off and running a lot, and he's been extremely productive on the ground. So that's one that stood out to me too.
Yeah, we've seen it time and time again. It kind of reminds me of Corral a little bit, what we saw last night. Both you and me were on Ole Miss. Very good stuff. They looked pretty good. And then just one more for you. Again, we'll be talking about PrizePicks throughout the show today and tomorrow. For Boston College, their running back Garwo, I think he will find the end zone. They're a team that obviously at times runs the ball a lot. What do you think about him? You know, they're a 5-point dog at home, but his rushing TD prop is at 0.5.
Yeah, these TD props are really interesting. You and I have talked about this a lot. If a guy projects for 0.9 touchdowns, sometimes they'll be priced at like half, 0.5 exactly. And there's just a lot more value in that towards the over. So these TD props are really interesting. Garwo has recently taken on an enormous workload. He did not have this workload to start the year, split a lot of time with Levy in there. But since then, like, he's been over 20 carries in each of the last 3 games. The matchup certainly doesn't scare you. So Garwo is somebody who's been on the field a lot more recently, and it doesn't look like the prop is quite adjusted.
Yep, I totally agree. So take advantage of that. We'll certainly keep our eyes out for more good values there. But let's dive into this slate. I know you guys are ready in chat. We are ready. Here we go. First game up, we've got Kansas State going to Texas. Texas is somehow still favorite, and I kind of get it. They're 2.5-point favorite, over under 53. Let's start with the Kansas State side. You know, they're a team that every time we bring them up, Matt, you always talk about how it's really a one-man band with Deuce Vaughn. He does everything. He's catching the ball. He's running the ball. Does that change here in this final game, or is it still that really the only guy you're targeting?
I think Deuce is the only one. They're having a little bit of like a quarterback controversy right now. Skylar Thompson's warming up, but Will Howard is taking first team reps. Slight downgrade. Thompson's been pretty efficient this year as a passer, but ultimately, like, how hard is it to get the ball to Deuce Vaughn? He's so active as a receiver, their second leading receiver. He's only 1 yard behind Phillip Brooks. He's easily the target leader. He has a 24% target share in the offense. And Texas isn't good against opposing backs. They allow they allow over 200 yards per game, And Deuce Vaughn, being as active as he is as a pass catcher, as a rusher, he'll see nearly every single carry on the ground. He has to be in consideration. And the thing about this slate is there's no real strong value on DraftKings. So you'll have to prioritize these guys. Do you want to pay up for Deuce or Brees or Beatty or Lou Nichols? Because, we have some MAC games on this slate. That's where I think the decisions get a little interesting. This game having a slightly depressed total makes me a little bit weary of Deuce Vaughn, because how many points are these teams going to score anyway? They're both slow offenses and they both are a little bit geared towards the run. So I think there's a little bit of upside to be desired, but Deuce is always in play.
Yeah, no doubt about it. When you can't be game scripted out, and just the way they run that off, it's just always such methodical. They don't run a lot of plays. And of course, this late in the season, I mean, this is it. We know what we're getting out of these teams. On the other side, Texas, I actually thought, even though I was firmly against them last week, I bet West Virginia. West Virginia did cover. I was really happy to see that. I actually came away saying, okay, maybe Texas has still some fight in them, and it makes me kind of want to bet them today. But at the same time, you've talked about this is a team that is walking wounded. They do seem at times just out of gas. I guess Thompson is going to be playing quarterback. The backfield, of course, has been in shambles a little bit with Bijan not there. What do you see from Texas? Obviously, they still got a true alpha on the outside, Worthy and everyone else.
Worthy will definitely get his. I think the concern is the pace of Kansas State. They're always depressing opponents, and Texas isn't fast to begin with, nor are they pass heavy. They'll only kind of enter those game scripts when they have to. Their last two games, Worthy's been in double-digit targets, for the two games prior where Texas wasn't in like as much negative game script as they've been in recently. Worthy below 10 targets, which is always going to be a concern from him. He can be game scripted out. That leads me towards the running backs. Roschon was our punt play of the week last week, and he split the backfield. So now with the increase in price, Keelan Robinson at 6,100 and Roschon at 55, I still think they're middling plays. Kansas State plays fairly strong defense overall, but they'll target the running backs a lot in the pass game. Like Roschon, very active in this capacity. He has 5 targets combined over the last 2 games. Keelan out targeted 3-1 last game, so that's a slight concern, but we are starved for value. So taking Roschon as a favorite at 5,500 is actually a pretty decent play in my opinion. And Casey Thompson in the pass game, he's just an expensive game manager. I think it's pretty hard to get to any of the pass catchers.
Any bet in this game?
I did not take it. I had the same thought as you. I was interested in Texas because of the injury to the quarterback, but I don't think I'm going to end up with this on my card.
I think I am going to end up betting Texas. Small, not one of my favorites of the day, but it's inside 3. That's kind of where I wanted it. And I don't know. They're at home. I don't think, as bad as they've played, they've at least been competitive. And I came away a little impressed last week, despite them not covering. Let's keep it when we get action on a Friday slate here. This is kind of a treat for us. We don't talk about this a ton on Saturdays. We've got Ohio and Bowling Green, 6.5-point favorite for Bobcats on the road, 48.5-point total. So these are teams that a lot of people watching the show, even some of the loyal listeners, may be saying, I haven't seen these teams. And I know if there's one person on this planet that has, it's you. So talk to me about Ohio first. I mean, they're a middling MAC team, but they're playing Bowling Green, who, besides Minnesota, has struggled. So what do you see from Ohio here?
This is a really tough game to break down, not only because these teams are low level, but we don't have injury reporting for either. Like flat out, no beat reporters, at least competent beat reporters, cover this team. So O'Shane Allison's been out for 2 weeks, and you will not even get a warm-up status from pregame. We won't even know if he's on the field. So I have no idea if he's playing. If you play Demontry Tuggle, he's basically going to be locked into a timeshare. And if Allison plays, this could be upwards of like a 4-man timeshare, which kind of really hurts against a Bowling Green team that does allow over 200 yards per game. But it's just really tough to target this running back situation outside of tournaments with the uncertainty it brings. Rourke is going to split time at quarterback with Armani Rogers. Rogers isn't really much of a passer, but he comes in for these gadget style run plays. And he does play enough raw snaps to kind of render Rourke unusable. And then in the pass game, the only reason you would get to any of these guys is just flat out price. And I think receivers primarily where people are going to be punting today. So I would not recommend a Tyler Walton or a Cameron Odom, but these guys are below 4K. And I think if you just want a 1-for-1 pivot, that's where you would get to these guys.
On the other side, Bowling Green's got a 21-point implied total. Again, not a great team by any stretch of the imagination. Is there anything you see there from McDonald? They've got obviously a somewhat crowded backfield, a couple guys sporting Q tags as well. What do you see from them on the other side?
Yeah, Terry and Stewart got hurt in the game. Dyson Patterson didn't play, another situation like Ohio where you probably will not even know who's warming up. So Nick Mosley, if he's in a two-way timeshare with Tron Keith, would have some intrigue at 3,800, but that's at best a two-way committee. And at worst, it's a four-way committee for a touchdown underdog on a team implied for 21 points. Again, Ohio is not good on defense, but again, you're just rolling the dice completely on this team. McDonald isn't much of a passer, and he has no dual threat ability. He's a Boston College transfer. And same thing with the receivers here. The only reason you're slightly interested is price. Austin Osborne leads the team in targets overall, and he's 4,300. Christian Sims, their tight end, he's averaging 5 targets per game. He's 3,900, but I don't see there being a lot of scoring upside here. Again, I think you're only playing Ohio and Bowling Greens as one-offs if you're already punting the receiver position.
Yeah, one of the lowest totals, on this 12-game slate that we've got. Doesn't see a ton, you mentioned your star for value, so maybe, but I totally get what you're doing there. Now we get the battle of the directionals, Eastern Michigan, Central Michigan, 8.5-point spread here. Total is 64, certainly more points to be expected. And I actually have bet Eastern Michigan a decent amount this year. I've been pretty impressed with this team. I like the way they play. I think they're a solid squad. I mean, does someone like Ben Bryant come up for you, the quarterback? Do there are other guys that are priorities? And I feel like they would be more in play than the game we just talked about.
This is a good game for DFS. And I like that it's a MAC game. I think people might shy away because there's not as many known names. One thing I want to talk about on this slate is I don't think 2 quarterbacks are a necessity. Pricing is so strict and the quarterbacks are so bad that I think you can play 4 running backs today. But if you are playing 2, these should be 2 primary considerations. Both these teams play fast. Both these teams are over 50% pass rate. The total is 64. This has shootout written all over it, and neither team is good on defense. For Ben Bryant, he has a phenomenal matchup. Central Michigan's allowing nearly 300 passing yards per game. Bryant benefits from that volume. He's not mobile, which is a concern, but matchup and volume through the air line up here. He's not expensive, and he's also easy to stack. Eastern Michigan throws the ball to 3 players and 3 players only. It's Hassan Beydoun as their alpha. It's Dylan Drummond, who's more of a possession receiver. And Tanner New's only played in 3 games this year, but he's averaging 9 targets per game when he's active and 79 per game as well, which leads the team. So Tanner New, I think, is the preferred play if you can get to him. Again, salary's tight. So if you can't, Dylan Drummond's a fine consolation prize. They use 4 backs. Sometimes it's condensed to 3. And in better game environments, I would have interest. But when this is such a bad timeshare, I think you just focus on the pass game here. But is that kind of how you see Eastern Michigan too?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing about them, you mentioned pretty consolidated target share. They should be trailing. They can score. And I definitely think it's a factor. We're late in the year. People are used to seeing Kansas State and Missouri and Arkansas and those teams on the slate every Saturday. It's part of their routine. Now they're throwing guys that they've never heard of. I think you go to what's familiar, and that can be a big advantage if you're willing to take the leap and roll this game. I don't mind the game stack. But on the other side, I mean, everything you said about Eastern Michigan, I think is almost more applicable to Central Michigan. They can score. They have a really healthy implied total. They run a ton of snaps. Obviously, it's a little different in terms of running the ball, obviously, with Nichols, but he's $10,000. I mean, his workload is honestly superior to basically anyone we talk about, but is that enough to justify this price tag?
He has the best workload in college football. It's truly unbelievable. He has 75 carries in the last 2 games.
Yeah, it's nuts.
Just the last 2 games. And he's extremely active as a pass catcher too. He has over 40 targets on the year, averages nearly 5 targets per game over their last 4 and over 20 yards receiving. There's nobody that is going to stop Lou Nichols unless he gets hurt. And Eastern Michigan allows over 200 rushing yards per game. In low risk contests, I think you just eat Lou Nichols. There's not very many pay down options at running back, whereas there's some at receiver. So I think the clear build for cash games is paying down at wideout, paying up at running back. And again, quarterback is really weak too. So I think you can use 4 running backs today. And Lou Nichols, he's the best raw play on the slate. And when you have other options like Breece Hall and Deuce Vaughn and Beatty, only slightly less expensive, I'm going to try to get to Lou Nichols and then play some cheaper backs like below 8K if I'm complimenting Lou Nichols. But he's the best running back play in a vacuum on the slate. I like what you said about the receivers here. Very stackable offense. And again, they run so many plays that Lou Nichols can get there in conjunction with a pass catcher. Richardson's not mobile, but he's easily stackable here. Khalil Pimpleton's the one Ja'Cory Sullivan's the 2, and Dallas Dixon's kind of the possession receiver number 3, all at different price points. Ja'Cory Sullivan is particularly cheap on this slate, and that's because he was hurt to begin the year, so some of his stats are depressed. But he's usually the 1B to Khalil Pimpleton's 1A in this offense when healthy.
Last question from this game. In like large field tournaments, is it too much to use Richardson with Nichols and incorporate him into your passing game stack?
I think if you do that, you just all out stack the game. So you're probably running something like Richardson, Nichols, Sullivan, and then you're probably using a run back on Eastern Michigan, New or Drummond, something like that. And I do have lineups like that today. This is a focal point for me.
I'm with you. I totally get that logic. Obviously, again, high risk, high reward type strategy. Let's keep it going. Boise State, San Diego State. We go to the Mountain West here. Not teams we're super familiar with. Boise State 3-point favorite, over under very pedestrian at 44. So Broncos have had a weird year. I thought they should have beat Oklahoma State. A lot of back and forth. They do have Shakir on the outside, a true alpha. So talk to me about him, a timeshare in the backfield, and anything else you want to mention.
I would have a lot more interest in Bachmeier if it weren't for the total in the game and the tough matchup. And it's not just San Diego State playing strong defense. They just slow the ball so much that you don't get as many possessions for the other team and as many plays. So Bachmeier, he's hard to play, even at 6K. I think he's viable in tournaments, and Shakir would be the preferred stacking option. Again, he's expensive. So you're debating, do I play players like Tyler Beatty or Deuce Vaughn, or do I play Khalil Shakir? And I think on this particular slate, you're going the running back route outside of big tournaments. Shakir is involved somewhat in the run game too. So I think he's the clear preferred option. Outside of him, we just don't know who's healthy. Like Stephen Cobb suited up last week, didn't play. Octavius Evans came back from injury in a limited role last week. Don't know how healthy he is. And if those guys miss time or are limited, does Billy Bowens play more? Davis Cutter? I have no idea. The pass catchers are really hard to stack among the cheaper options just because they're always banged up. And Boise is another one of these teams that is very willing to suit up players, warm them up, and then sit them out. We saw that with Cobbs last week. We've seen that with Holani multiple times this year. And in the backfield, it is Holani, but he's splitting time with Cyrus Habibi-Lukoyo. And it's pretty even. And Habibi-Lukoyo is the preferred pass catcher. So 50-50 split there. Tough to get to with such a low total.
On the other side, you mentioned San Diego State. Their best player is their punter, no doubt about it, and you can't play him. That guy's unbelievable. But is there anything from a roster standpoint that we can get to here? Again, it's just such a team that plays at such a snail's pace. Really good defense. They don't throw the ball a lot. Anything you want to talk about with the Aztecs?
I think Greg Bell's a good GPP play. When they're playing from positive game script, he'll get over 20 carries. He's been banged up at times this year, so the workload's not what we thought it was going to be heading into the season. But Boise allows over 160 yards per game, and Bell is not expensive. So in tournaments, I think he's a good playoff year like Roschon's and stuff in that 5K range. I will be playing one of those 5K backs in low-risk contests too, just for salary savings.
Anything else from this game? I didn't bet it. I'm not going to bet it.
Same with me. I'm right up there with you.
Utah State, 17-point favorite going to New Mexico. Not a big total, though, 48.5. It just shows kind of that New Mexico plays might be few and far between. Utah State's a team, Matt, we've seen them a couple times, I feel like, on Thursday slates or Friday slates throughout the year where there were shorter slates. We've talked about Logan Bonner quite a bit, and certainly Tyler in the backfield and Tompkins for clearly on the outside. I mean, is this a team that they run a lot of plays? They are a sizable favorite and they're taking money. Do you think you could go to them in just an onslaught type situation?
Yeah, I do. I don't think they're going to be popular. Bonner is just so expensive. So you need to make significant concessions if you play him. So I think one way you can target this game is use these Utah State guys as one-offs. I think Calvin Tyler's an excellent tournament play as nearly 17-point favorites against the New Mexico defense, allowing over 160 yards per game. Tyler is another player who was limited earlier in the year because of injury, but he has since worked well ahead of Elian Noah and John Gentry, and he's somewhat active in the pass game. So I think you can rely on all of those things for Tyler in tournaments. I really like him there. Devin Tompkins is one of the best receivers in the country. He averages nearly 140 yards per game, 12 targets per game. He already has 1,500 yards. It's just another question. Do you play Tompkins or do you play a Breece Hall or someone up there in that range? I think you could make that concession. It's just probably tournament only.
Yeah, I mean, it's just on the other side of the game. I mean, for these guys to really get there, I don't think they need New Mexico to cooperate, but I just don't know exactly what you get out of a team like this. They don't throw the ball a lot. They're not very good. Is there anything? What? Go ahead,
No,
please.
go ahead. They don't throw the ball a lot.
Understatement.
They've taken it to like the nth degree at this point in the season because Terry Wilson's been hurt. So they've gone full triple option really in the last couple of weeks. They only threw the ball 7 times last week. The week before, only 9 times. So like you can't play the pass catchers, you can't play the quarterbacks, and then they use a 4-way time turn in the backfield. I think I should have skipped over this as much as I did with Utah State. I only spent time on Tompkins, but Derek Wright's below 5K and Justin McGriff is below 4K. I think you can punt with either of them because of the matchup. And Utah State basically runs 4 wide every single play. So I'm comfortable with Justin McGriff as a complete punt. There aren't really a ton better punts than him down there.
Is he cash viable?
He's like in play. So I'm debating a lot. There's like 4 receivers down there that I think are viable. It's him, it's the Iowa kid Johnson, and then it's the Mizzou receivers, which we'll talk about all of them and probably in the next couple games. So he's like right in play with them.
Another game I have anti-interest in betting. Utah State's taking the money, but I'm not going to lay 17 points with them, and there's no chance I bet New Mexico.
100%.
Iowa, Nebraska, it's floating around pick 'em. This is a game we talked about on Betting You, which you can catch every Wednesday. Podcast, exclusive podcast. Just find it on our, the Awesemo podcast network, or just search Betting You, Spotify, any of those places. You can check it out. Nebraska's taking a little money now. They're a 1-point favorite. But let's start with Iowa first. They're a team that is never friendly from a DFS standpoint because they just can't do anything offensively. Goodson hasn't had the best year, but he still gets some serious work, particularly when they're winning. He's 6,400 on DraftKings, 8,200 on FanDuel. Where does he fall in with the running back ranks? You said it's pretty deep, talent pool today. And is there anything else from Iowa we should be thinking about?
He's certainly viable because you can't play all of the expensive backs. Goodson's like a borderline cash play for me. I think he's in that same range as like Tyler for Utah State, where they're good pivots and nearly cash viable. And you mentioned Goodson. It's just efficiency he lacks. Good pass catching role. Nobody else really sees a significant workload in the run game. They use Gavin Williams as a change of pace. The only issue is the total here is extremely low, and Nebraska plays fairly strong defense overall. So again, do we get one of these inefficient performances from Goodson? And if we do, is the raw volume enough to propel him there? I think part of what it could come down to for him is just raw touchdowns, which makes him a good tournament play, because if he ends up scoring 2 of the 3 touchdowns they're projected for, great. If not, he probably busts your lineup. And you don't play anybody in the pass game outside of Keegan Johnson, who's emerged as their wide receiver 1. He's averaging 6.5 targets per game over the last 4, and he's 3,500. So he's another one of these players that is like on the fringe of cash consideration, and you can poke holes in all of them. Like for McGriff on Utah State, he's the wide receiver 4, which is the main issue, but he's a high scoring wide receiver 4. Keegan Johnson's the wide receiver 1 on a low volume passing attack with very little scoring expectations. So you're trying to balance those things out.
The other side of this game, we've got a Nebraska team that it seems like they're always in the games. They never win the games. They've lost 5 straight. They've lost 7 of 8. It's been all sorts of problems. And now Adrian Martinez, who at times to me has been the one, not lone bright spot, but certainly played pretty well. He is hurt. He is out. They turn to Logan Smothers. So what does this do to a Nebraska team? Obviously, Iowa's defense has always traveled well. Can Nebraska move the ball, and is this guy in play?
I think he is in play, basically because of raw salary restrictions on DraftKings. We can maybe talk about FanDuel at the end, just from a macro perspective. But on the DraftKings slate, Smothers is one way to open up some value. And he was recruited as a dual threat. In the very, very limited sample we have of him, he has been a strong runner, similar to Martinez. But again, that sample is so small, and he is going into a buzzsaw of a defense here. How do these things factor into today's slate? I do not want to stack him. If I was, it would be Torrey, but he's 6K, which is kind of laughable for him at this point. And then they rotate all of their other receivers. And that's not something we want to target here. In the run game, doubtful for Ramir Johnson. I don't think we see him. And as the replacement, they used a 3-way timeshare consisting of Marquise Stepp, the USC transfer, Marvin Scott, and a backup receiver in Brody Belt. Nebraska is a really hard team to target outside of Smothers, so I'm very willing to run just naked without a stack because of his rushing ability.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. He should slide right into that. And this is just, Nebraska's been a tough team. Iowa, certainly a strong defense. It's a very low total game. Normally we just skip this game when I was involved, but I guess we got more than usual, and that's saying something. Anything else from this game?
I don't think so. Do you have any nuggets on Smothers? I know he's a four-star dual threat.
Not really. Yeah. The only thing that I know about him truly is that I think he can mirror some of what Adrian Martinez does, not in terms of production, but in terms of, like the carries and whatnot. But I mean, we really haven't seen this guy a ton. He can move a little bit. And I don't think I was particularly, this is the game that I had circled like months ago because I thought might still be undefeated somehow. And Nebraska, I think, would have beat them, but that is long gone for a lot of reasons. Can we short Torrey on PrizePicks with a backup QBs at 64.5 receiving yards? What do you think about that?
I'm going to pull up my projection as fast as I can, but first instinct is yes. I will get you the for sure answer right now, but that seems high to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is a weird game because it seems like obviously somebody's going to be leading. And I think when you talk about guys, whether it's a punt play with Keegan Johnson on the outside or a guy like that, if one of these teams can force the other to just volume pass a little more, it could push it up a little. But overall, I don't think any of these guys on the outside is unshortable just because of the nature of the teams.
51 yards for me, projections.
Yeah, there you go.
Pretty good value towards the under.
All right, let's keep it moving. Obviously, as I say, it's good to see everyone the day after Thanksgiving. Hit that like button, show the support. We're going to be back tomorrow as well, talking Saturday, big time games, including the game. And certainly with Matt, I know he's doing just overtime on overtime with college basketball here in full swing. If you want any of those things or our picks, get inside the glass, awesemo.com/join. You can sign up for a package. You hop in our Discord. All you got to do is press .picks. You're going to get our full cards each and every day. You get all the projections, all the ownership, all the tools that Matt and the entire team do for college football, and certainly all the tools for college basketball if you sign up for that as well. We've got Missouri. We've got Arkansas. Mizzou is coming off a win. Don't get to say that a lot. They're back to being a sizable underdog, though, over 2 touchdowns, 14.5 here. Arkansas has played the hardest schedule in the country, 63-point total. You mentioned to me before the show that Missouri, even though they're not a great team, they're a very important team on this slate because they've got Tyler Beatty. They've got some pay down receivers. I'm interested to know, is it Dove? Is it Chisholm? Is it somebody else? How do you look at this team when you're breaking down the slate today?
Maslick's really hard to get to. Tough matchup for him. The redeeming qualities to Missouri are they're fairly fast. They're very pass heavy and they're pretty condensed. Like in the backfield, especially Tyler Beatty, man, he just has probably the best workload in the country. It rivals Deuce Vaughn. I think the only player that has a better workload than Beatty is Lou Nichols, who just happens to also be on this slate. So Beatty leads the team in targets. He averages 31 receiving yards per game. His carry counts are just ridiculous. 35 and 28 in the last 2 games, 126 yards on the ground for him. And again, Missouri's always underdogs. They're constantly playing against these SEC opponents where they're outmatched, but Beatty continues to produce. So he is a very, very strong play at 8,700. He's a bit cheaper than your Brees Halls, your Lou Nichols. If you can't afford to get them, I'm completely fine with Beatty. The real question for me is this team passes so much that you have Tusky Dove and Kiki Chisholm as these receivers who are in high volume roles, but they never have a high scoring expectation. So they're kind of in the same bucket as your Johnson from Iowa, as your McGriff for Utah State. And I think I might be playing one of these Missouri receivers in cash. I'm still messing around with 2 or 3 builds, but Kiki Chisholm on the year, he's been the wide receiver 1, but Tusky Dove has recently taken on a larger workload. In their last 4 games, Dove has out-targeted him 4.8 targets per game to 3.3 for Chisholm. And in this game, they're projected to trail as usual. They're going to be throwing the ball a lot. Basilic is back from injury. You might just get raw catch volume, which could be enough if you're targeting other studs on the slate in the same lineups.
We just had a question on this, and it kind of feeds into what you're just talking about. Of the cheap receivers on this slate, and I know you're kind of tossing this around on your own. You've got like McGriff, you've got Johnson for Iowa, and you've got these Mizzou guys. Is there anybody else that you like more than them? Who would you hone in if you needed a cheap wide receiver?
There's one other situation. It's TCU, but we need an injury update on that. Quentin Johnson is the key for that situation. And if he's out, that would be a condensed target share there, at least more condensed. So then some of the TCU cheapies would be in play. But right now, without that information, I'm leaning more towards playing one of the Mizzou receivers in cash. Again, I don't feel good about it, but like Missouri is a 14.5 point underdog, still has a higher implied team total than Iowa. That says a lot. And you can take their wide receiver 1 and 2 in Toski Dub versus the wide receiver 4 for Utah State. So right now, that's my lean.
I want to ask you one other thing about Missouri before we move to Arkansas. As bad as they are, Tyler Beatty, yes, he's always very, very busy. There's no doubt about it. And he can clearly contribute in the passing game, which is a luxury if they're trailing. His carries have been massive, but they've won those games. They beat Florida, they beat South Carolina, and they beat Vandy. And clearly when they're winning, he runs the ball a lot, even going back to the first game against Central Michigan. When they get crushed, he's more in the teens for carries. Do you worry about that, or you say it's just made up because he catches more balls when they're trailing?
No, I do worry about that for sure. I've played Beatty in some games where he's just completely phased out. The Tennessee game is one that I remember vividly having a huge stand on Beatty when he was somewhat lower owned. And then he'll play when they're behind, but it gets to a point where if they're down 3-4 scores, they'll start to use their backup backs. And I think that makes sense. What is the point of running Beatty out in that situation? If you want to play it safer, I think you find the 400 and play Deuce Vaughn. That game is projected to be much, much closer than Deuce Vaughn. His workload is a little bit less than Beatty's overall, but it's quite similar. So I think you can make that concession and just pay up the $400 for the safety of Vaughn if you do not feel good about Beatty.
On the other side of this game, you've got a team with a 38.5 implied total. They're at home. They're sizable favorites. They play better teams than Missouri every week. But what do we have? We've got KJ. I mean, they do. This team plays everybody. And then they played Arkansas Pine Bluff. KJ Jefferson, Treylon Burks. Is there more to say? Are they priced out? What do you do with Arkansas today?
They're priced out for me. Jefferson has the upside, but they're just so low volume when they win. Again, they play slightly above average in terms of pace, but they're playing in these highly competitive games. And when we've seen them in these slower games where they can control, they will play much slower and they're run heavy regardless. And when they can play with positive game script, you're going to see their 37.5% pass rate fall even further towards 30%. So KJ Jefferson, he is mobile, but if he's not scrambling on the ground, I see a very difficult time him reaching a ceiling performance, especially he's nearly 8K on DraftKings and nearly 10K on FanDuel. Tough price for him. And Burks has a 31% target share, but he hasn't been in double-digit targets in any of the team's last 4 games. And he's been at 6 or fewer in 2 of those 4. There's just not enough volume for Burks at 8.2K. The upside is clear. He could score 2 touchdowns on 7 targets, but that target volume leaves a ton to be desired. And then that trickles down to the rest of the pass catchers. Their second most targeted receiver, Warren Thompson, only has 33 targets this year. Burks has 81. In the run game, this is interesting. Missouri has what is widely regarded as one of the worst run defenses in college football. They're allowing nearly 230 yards. But you recently saw a changing of the guard in Arkansas. They listed Dominique Johnson as the number 1 on the depth chart, and then they listed Raheem Sanders and Treylon Smith with the or as the backup. Now, they haven't necessarily treated them like that. It is still largely a 3-way committee, and Treylon Smith actually had the best game last week against Alabama. You didn't see any efficiency from Sanders or Dominique Johnson. Even in a 3-way timeshare, with the slate we have, where we're star for value, Treylon Smith makes a little bit of sense here. And he does have some pass catching upside, but I still think this is kind of like a Georgia situation where even though they're heavy favorites a lot, the raw committee makes them hard to trust.
It is kind of crazy because, the optics of the game look really good for them. They're at home, they're sizable favorite, good implied total, but Georgia's a really good scenario. They're like that every game, and they're 40-point favorite today. And I'm sure somehow no one will have a big game because that's what they do. I get it. I think for tournaments you could go to KJ Jefferson, but maybe if you use someone and you go Beatty on the other side and you have a weird stack of this game, but certainly not my priority on this slate. Anything else? I wanted to bet this game, but I don't know exactly what's going on with Missouri in general. I kind of stayed away ultimately.
I took it really early in the week at 14. I haven't been able to find that line since. It's mostly 14.5.
Yeah. I mean, it's bounced around a little, but feels about right. I kind of lean over. I think points will be put up. It's not a bad game for DFS. USF, UCF. They have a name for this game. I forgot what it is. It's not that cool. 62-point total. It's something. It's like a battle for a road, but I don't know the interstate. USF 17.5-point underdogs. These teams. Talk to me about USF. They've had a tough year at times lately. I thought they've made some strides, but realistically, is this a team that we should be getting to with just a 21-point implied total?
I think sneaky shootout. UCF has allowed a lot of production to opposing offenses. Timmy McClain has been banged up for a lot of the year, and that's really important because he's so mobile, and he had an ankle injury. So he's now further away from that. Perhaps there's this cheap dual threat ability here. I think he's an excellent pivot off Smothers, who I think is going to be far more owned. And we just have a larger sample of Timmy McClain, and he's been efficient when he's out there. It's just he's been in and out of games because of injury. He's pretty easy to stack as well. This offense, they're fairly fast. They're above average in terms of play volume. They're fairly balanced in terms of pass rate, slightly favoring the run here. But Xavier Weaver is projected to be back in this game. He's the alpha, a little expensive for him. But you could go down and play Jimmy Horn. He's another one of these players below 4K. I do not think he is as desirable as some of the Mizzou receivers or like a Keegan Johnson, but he makes a nice stacking option if you take this route. And this is kind of one of the sneakier games on the slate with a 62 total. A lot of people are shying away from it because of the injuries on the other side, which we'll get to. But there's a lot of upside here. And even if you use one of these USF receivers as a run back, I don't hate it. The backfield is kind of difficult to target. Brian Beatty is injured. We don't know if he's injured enough to miss the game, but Kelly Joyner really stepped up in his place. Again, they typically are using a three-headed monster there. So if I'm targeting USF, it's going to be with the contrarian McClain or just using one of the receivers as a one-off.
Battle for I-4. That's the name of this. Thank you. Or the Battle for Del Boca Vista, as Gavin says. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. These are teams that we haven't seen a ton on slates. UCF, of course, has transitioned a little bit with the change in coaching and whatnot. But the thing that's interesting about them here is Dylan Gabriel. So we haven't seen him in quite some time. What does that do to this offense? Is he playable? What start? Do you think he's going to play? How do you break down a UCF team that has some major news?
Again, you're going to have to watch pregame. What I've heard is that he's been practicing all week, which suggests to me he should be good to go. It's a collarbone injury, so it's not a soft tissue. Like if he's cleared for contact, he should be good to go for the game. I think it comes down to planning at that point. Is he just ready to handle everything that they want to do in the game plan? I think he'll play. Again, make sure you're just watching pregame. We need to talk about him on FanDuel primarily.
Yeah, what?
He's basically the min price over there. You just obviously lock him into cash games on FanDuel. He's the access point to all of the expensive players over there. We don't have that access point on DraftKings. He's very expensive on DraftKings, so I think he's harder to get to there. But again, he's going to be contrarian because of the price. I think he's playable on both, but on FanDuel, he needs to be a priority. Easy to stack to. Pass catchers at every single price tier. O'Keefe is the expensive option. You could stack O'Keefe and Dylan Gabriel on FanDuel easily. You could play Brandon Johnson. I think there's a chance that even Jalen Robinson, he's now in his third game back from injury, and his opportunity is slowly increasing week by week. Again, they're sort of easing him back into action, but he was the one when healthy. He's much cheaper on DraftKings, so he makes an interesting contrarian stack, and then you could use a USF receiver as a run back. We need to talk about the backfield. Bowser hasn't played in 2 weeks. He's been injured multiple times this year, and he keeps trying to come back and aggravating injuries and getting injured again. Johnny Richardson and Mark Anthony Richards have handled the workload in his place. I think this is going to become a three-headed committee if you see Bowser return, which even though they're huge favorites against a bad USF run defense, that's hard to target. I think those players are GPP viable. And Mark Anthony Richards, like 10 carries last week, nearly 3 touchdown favorites against USF. We need punt plays. This is essentially the same play to me as like the Traylon Smith. And you're going to see Mark Anthony Richards unowned, and he would be a much, much better play if Bowser's out.
Yeah, you mentioned the 3,300 and the depth of running back today. So there are some lineups, just to go back, because we were talking about this in chat a little bit, where you have 4 running backs on your team.
Yeah.
How many times has that happened to you this year? It's got to be
on main slates.
Yeah.
I think there was one other one where I had like a couple, but yeah, basically this never happens. It was another week, maybe 4 weeks ago, where we just had extremely sensitive pricing, like really expensive players across the board.
It happens. I mean, that's what the cards were dealt. And yeah, obviously if Gabriel is good to go and he's not sick and he's not hurt and he's in at FanDuel, you mentioned the access point. It's hard not to play him and figure out the rest later. All right, we've got 4 games to go. I do want to say very quickly, it's not just college football around here. Of course, the NFL is in full swing, and we've got a ridiculous everyone's got a Black Friday promo. Of course, we do too. $1 promo code stuffing. People eat stuffing on Thanksgiving. I didn't. I had a steak. It was nice. But I hope you enjoyed all that and you want to get that for just $1. You're going to get that NFL Express Pass. It's going to give you, just kind of a preview and a taste of what we do each and every week. And if you like it, you keep it. If not, you've lost $1. It's got the showdown content as well. Some of those really great tools that Alex and the team have. And again, promo code stuffing, just $1 for that week long of Awesemo NFL Express. Not a bad deal. Cincinnati, East Carolina. I'm not saying anything's going to happen, but if it did, remember that I at least said this little caveat. East Carolina is not that bad. And everyone, they look so good against SMU last week. I think Cincinnati, they've got Houston on deck. This is a weird game. So I want to ask you in general, do you worry about them? And then what does it do with Ritter and all these guys? I mean, how does Cincinnati attack East Carolina today?
I think mainly on the ground, that's East Carolina's weakness. And they have Jerome Ford back from injury. Ford is a great GPP play. I think a lot of people in that price range are going to try to pay up for Beatty, and they should. His workload is much, much better than Ford's. Cincinnati has this terrible habit of taking their foot off the gas in games they shouldn't. And ultimately, sometimes that comes from raw play volume. Sometimes that comes from putting scrubs in, but they tend to do that. That's why Ford doesn't have the best workload, and he's still going to be projected less than a guy like Beatty. But he has that 4 touchdown upside. Their implied team total is enormous. Decent matchup against a poor East Carolina run defense. Ritter is the same way. He's just low volume. Efficiency's there. He's not running as much as he has in the past, and they'll take their foot off the gas a lot. Incredibly hard to stack because you have a guy in Alec Pierce averaging 5.5 targets per game, priced at 6.7K and 8K on FanDuel. Their wide receiver 2, Michael Young, missed their last game, which actually consolidated snaps a little bit for Trey Tucker and Tyler Scott. Typically, they run a rotation with those players, but it's really hard to target Cincinnati overall on these slates because of the rotation they run, the slow offense they use. I am using Ford as a one-off GPP pivot to some of the other expensive backs in a decent amount of lineups, but that's really it.
On the other side, again, East Carolina's, they're playing better. They run a lot of plays a game. They're a difficult team to plan for. I think they could give them a little trouble today, but they still have a mediocre team total at 21. One of the more confusing things, and this has been brought up, I think in passing a lot, their quarterback Holton Ayers, a couple of years ago now, I felt like this was a guy that legitimately had, 100-yard bonus upside on the ground, and that really went away for a long time. Suddenly it's come back a little bit. What do you attribute to that in recent weeks? He's been rushing a little more and certainly effectively. Do you think we see a true dual threat here? Is there something that I missed? How do you attack the East Carolina signal caller?
I think it'll be tough here. He's going up against a good Cincinnati pass rush, good Cincinnati pass coverage. I think it's really tough to evaluate this rushing. He clearly has the skill set. They just haven't utilized it much. I think some of that comes down to like designed runs. We've seen an increase in those over the second half of the year. He's been at least 4 design runs in each of the last 4 games, and he's been over 7 in 2 of those 4. So you are seeing kind of a return to the dual threat Allairs, and I think some of that's play calling. But ultimately in this game, really low total, stifling Cincinnati defense. He's hard to get to, but I think he is tournament viable because their pass rate is high, and they're extremely fast in plays per game. Cincinnati is going to depress that. They play the exact opposite style of offense, but you still have some viability to Allairs. Again, he's hard to play, not only because of some of the matchups we just talked about, but these receivers are walking into the most difficult part of the Cincinnati defense, and that's how East Carolina wins. So Tyler Snead's very expensive. His role is still consistent. You have cheaper options like Audio Matosho and CJ Johnson. CJ Johnson's below 4K, so he's another one of these receivers in the mix, but he's really volatile. He's gone back-to-back 8 targets, 3 targets, 8 targets, 3 targets. So if he has a 3-target game, he's certainly not paying off against the Cincinnati defense. The run game's hard to get to as well as 2 touchdown underdogs. They are somewhat active in the pass game, but it is a 50-50 timeshare between Keaton Mitchell and Rajai Harris, even though Keaton Mitchell has nearly doubled up Rajai Harris in terms of rushing yardage on the same volume. It's pretty ridiculous that they continue to involve Harris.
Yeah, Mitchell just seems a little priced out, just given that there's another back behind him and the game script. It could go away. He's not a 0 in the passing game by any stretch, but also not, extreme. So I'm with you there. I haven't bet this yet, and I'll be honest, I don't know what it would be. East Carolina or pass. Anything from you on the betting side of this game?
No, I'm not going to take it.
Well, this UNLV and Air Force. Yes, I've been waiting my whole life to talk about this type of game. 18-point underdog. We got Air Force, who only runs the ball, 50-point total. UNLV is really bad. I don't know if we've talked about them all year. Mercifully, what is there to say about this team? They're another team. Some of these awful squads, they run the ball with some of these guys at an insane pace, even though they're always losing. What do you think UNLV does? And does the fact that Air Force takes like 8 minutes off the clock with their drives make this borderline unplayable?
That's exactly it. And UNLV's been pretty competitive in some spots. They've played a very difficult schedule for a G5 team, but they've now lost 2 quarterbacks. And I don't think Cameron Fryle is going to play in this game. Again, watch his status, even though you're probably not playing him anyway. But overall, he just has a more efficient effect on the offense compared to Justin Rogers. The one player you might consider is Charles Williams. They will feed him the rock regardless of game script. They could be losing by 30 points. Charles Williams still getting 20 carries. Doesn't matter. Can he get to 100 yards on those carries is the key. He is somewhat active in the pass game, but again, he really needs that volume to pay off for you. And I think there's better options in the price range. And one of them is on the other side of the game. We'll get to him in a second. Because of the low volume passing attack and just overall, and the low volume passing attack comes mainly from plays per game. They're actually fairly pass heavy. They just don't get off a lot of plays. They're very hard to play these options. And Kyle Williams, their wide receiver 1, saw a huge role reduction last week, about 25% of the snaps. Steve Jenkins popped way up. I think if you play anyone, it's him. But again, are you really playing 4,800 for Steve Jenkins when you could get like Drummond or some of these guys in better game environments at a similar price?
Yeah, I mean, they've only got a 16-point implied total, and it's just a really tough situation. You mentioned Charles Williams, I like him on paper, but you've got other, like I would rather play Calvin Tyler and roll the dice there. I'd certainly rather get up to Roberts, who we're going to talk about in a second on the other side of this game. So if you haven't seen Air Force, they throw the ball on a dangerous 14% clip on the year. That's insane. They just don't have to. They run the ball at will, the triple option. They're coming off a ridiculous game. I watched it from start to finish. Against Nevada. What a wild one in double overtime. But I don't think they're going to have a bunch of trouble here. So what do you do with a team that we know they're going to run the ball? I assume you don't want to waste maybe your lone quarterback spot on a guy like Daniels. So what else is there?
Yeah, I don't think it's worth getting to at all. But Daniels, like some triple option offenses flow through their quarterback and some don't. This one doesn't. So Daniels, while he is involved in the run game, we need to treat these triple option quarterbacks like running backs to begin with. And then if your triple option offense isn't flowing through your running or your quarterback, and there's not really much passing upside, they're basically fades for me. So it's basically Brad Roberts or bust here. He's handling a massive workload. With that said, there is no pass catching whatsoever. Can he do it on the ground? And he has. He's averaging over 100 yards per game. He's averaging 23.5 carries per game. So the volume's there. But I think he's a little bit riskier than your Deuce Vaughns, your Beatties. But again, he's not in the same price tier. He's in the same price tier as like a Charles Williams. So I do have lineups with Roberts. He does offer you some salary savings. And I think he's the only viable option on this team. Some of your other players like DeAndre Hughes, who plays receiver, he got a massive price increase and he's not going to see any pass catching work. Like Dane Kinneman's not even in the price. He's not even in the player pool. Say the way this team shakes out, it's Brad Roberts or it's nothing.
2 games left, Colorado and Utah. Colorado is a gigantic underdog, 24 points, playing clearly the hottest team in the Pac-12. It's just Utah got off to that bad start, 52-point total. We got to have one. And Bowling Green is on the slate. So does Colorado get the award of the most irrelevant team on the slate?
Yeah, they're worse than Bowling Green. Bowling Green is at least pass heavy enough to target a receiver. Colorado is not. They're one of the slowest teams in the country, bottom 10 in pace. They only throw the ball 42% of the time. They're not efficient when they do throw the ball. And then they run a rotation at receiver, so we don't even know who's going to get the ball. They don't have a player on their team averaging more than 2.9 targets per game or 27 yards. Like the X out this team. The only thing you could look to is a contrarian Jarek Broussard, who's worked ahead of Alex Fontenot. That is still ultimately like a 65-35 split, 70-30 split, somewhere in there. So any sort of split in this inefficient of an offense is not ideal. This team has a 13.75 implied team total.
Yeah, that's not it. That's not the answer.
That is not it.
That is not it. On the other side, I mean, Utah looks fantastic. They're doing whatever they want to whoever they want. So what are they going to do to Colorado? Is it Rising? Is it Thomas in the backfield? Is it a variation of guys on the outside? Or are they like Georgia, where they're going to put up a bunch of points, but they don't consolidate that into enough to make these guys viable?
They consolidate a little more than other teams. Rising is incredibly efficient. They haven't need to use him as much lately, and even against Oregon, they didn't need to use him a ton. But Rising, mobile, I would be concerned with his volume in this game. You could stack him. Covey's seen a reduction in workload, and Devon Vele has emerged as their number one route runner. It hasn't necessarily translated to targets yet, but Vele's at the stone minimum. He's a great play today. Again, I don't think you're going to see a lot of volume for Vele, but when he does get targeted, I assume there's going to be strong efficiency that's reflected in the spread and the implied team total for Utah. They're at nearly 40 points, even though the game total is at just 51.5. So Utah is going to put up points. The real great option, I think, here is Tavian Thomas. He played one game since the injury, but he had 21 carries in the game, out-carried TJ Pledger 21-10, so we know the workload is there. I expect it to kind of be a Georgia situation where they feed multiple backs work, Pledger, Michael Bernard, maybe even Chris Curry. But again, the efficiency should be there. So if Tavian Thomas is reduced to 15 carries, he could still be GPP viable over some of these other backs like Beatty, who's in a tough matchup but has a better workload.
Anything else? Yeah, I mean, Thomas. So just look at this game from a cash standpoint. You've got the flat min and Vele, and then a guy like Thomas. Are they just solid plays, or do you think they could crash a cash type lineup?
I'm playing Vele in cash.
Okay, man. This slate is why. I mean, I get it when you're paying up for that type of production at running back, you're forced to go that low. So your wide receivers are going to leave a lot to be desired, right?
Yes, quite a bit.
Okay. Just making sure. All right, we're right here. Oh, God, I almost bet North Texas today. That was unfortunate. I should have done that in college basketball. I was so close before the show. I know no one cares about that. Just wanted to get that out there. One game left. TCU, 15-point underdogs against Iowa State, 60.5-point total. You mentioned during the show there could be some situations in terms of injuries with TCU. Can expand upon that and talk about where this team is at?
Yeah, it's at the receiver position with Quentin Johnston. When he's healthy, he's their only player they use in a full-time role, and they rotate Darius Davis, Tay Barber, Quincy Brown, Blair Conright. But when he's out, they consolidate snaps a little bit more. So he's key. The environment here is very, very good. So you could see one of these guys having a big score, using one of them as a run back to an Iowa State stack. So I do have some of these TCU receivers. It's a late game, so you're going to have to just roll the dice, which I'm willing to in tournaments, certainly not willing to in cash games. Chandler Morris is out, so Dugan is back. We like Dugan for his mobility. This TCU team is slow and run heavy, so I think you can stack him or run him naked. I'm fine with either. The backfield is a 50-50 timeshare between Kendry Miller and Amari DeMercado, neither of whom are particularly strong plays as 2 touchdown underdogs, but I could see either getting there if there's efficiency. They'll use a little bit of the hot hand. And then again, the receivers, I think in order of priority, you have Blair Conright and Darius Davis is the top 2. And then you have Quincy Brown and Tay Barber as your very cheap options. Tay Barber played more snaps than Quincy Brown in their last game, but Tay Barber did a ton of run blocking, interestingly enough. Their routes were almost identical, and then Barber wasn't targeted. All of these players are GPP viable if you're trying to play some Iowa State guys, and I think a lot of people will, because their implied team total is enormous. The total is solid overall, and there's just a lack of options on the slate.
I assume you're assuming that Johnston's going to sit.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense. It seems like he's going to. So you've got that. And then, yeah, let's talk about this final team. So Breece Hall normally is the most expensive back on any slate. He's not here. Does that make him, tournament different in terms of a pivot? What do you do here with Breece Hall, who also has a serious workload, but it's not in the nickels territory?
He's a good play. If you're playing just one, I would rather find the salary to get up to nickels. There have been a lot of inefficient performances from Breece Hall on the year, but this does not look like it's going to be one of them. TCU allowing over 230 rushing yards per game. Hall is the 3rd most targeted receiver on the team. He's involved in every game script. It's just Iowa State has embraced the pass a little more of late, and that is smart by their coach. They've been far more efficient when using the pass. A lot of Breece Hall's workload has been him slamming into the back of his offensive line for inefficient opportunity. But this game, again, they're big favorites. TCU is one of the worst run defenses in the conference. Breece should be in a much better game environment. Again, I prefer nickels in a 1-for-1 situation, but I think you could play both, and there's constructions that allow that.
Anything from the passing game before we bounce on out of here?
Purdy might be the best quarterback play on the slate, and price adjusted, that is. And that's saying a lot, and it really speaks to how bad the quarterback position is on DraftKings today. Purdy does have volume on his side. He's mobile, both of which are very important. So the safety is there. Whereas like a Smothers, we just don't have a sample size. If we knew a little bit more about Smothers, I would prefer him 1-for-1. But Purdy is the safer option for like cash games. So that's where I am going right now. The only worry with Purdy is this Iowa State team going back to their early season ways of slamming Breece Hall into the back of the offensive line repeatedly, which could happen. But because of the elevated pass rate, like Hutchinson and Kohler project very well. Jalen Noel projects decent as well. He has at least 6 targets in the last 3 games. He's emerged as the wide receiver 2 opposite Hutchinson. I think all 3 are tournament viable.
Look at that. 12 up and 12 down. There you have it, folks, for me, for Matt, for Awesemo, for PrizePicks. Hope you guys enjoyed that. And again, stay tuned. We've got shows throughout the day, 12:30. We've got our Tap Stack show breaking down some NFL content. And you're going to see me and Matt tomorrow, same time, same place, 11 Eastern, breaking down a whole bunch of games for rivalry week. So good luck today. We hope you guys take it down. If you have any questions, at JazzRazDFS, at Matt_Gajeski. Thanks to our man Tyler behind the glass. Good luck, everybody. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.